Ever since I started taking this channel seriously a little over a year ago, I wanted to do a video that detailed exactly what happened when I was at Blistered Thumbs from my perspective. Now, I've been interviewed about this twice. Once by William Usher from One Angry Gamer, and another time by Oscar Gonzalez from Original Gamer. However, I've always wanted to give a much more detailed account, since Blistered Thumbs in a way is what I would consider to be one of my biggest triumphs, but also what inspired me to stand up and take on the social justice and leftist influence within entertainment to the best of my ability anyway. On top of that, Mister Metokur is doing a series on major channel awesome talent, so I feel like he's forced my timetable on this. But that's fine by me though. I think it's time to tell this story. The story starts back in the summer of 2010. After a nasty divorce that I'd gone through 2 years prior and a failed attempt at going back to college, I was, sad to say, in a bit of a rut in my life. I was living with family at the time and spent a lot of my spare time trying my best to keep busy by helping my youngest sister with her homework, alongside working out and such. I was also a part of the That Guy with the Glasses fan community. Yeah, I admittedly was a nostalgia critic fan at one point. While this was going on, as I was chatting it up with people on the Spoonie boards, I clicked with fellow Illinois resident who goes by the name of Pushing Up Roses, who is still a content creator. At one point or another, she had told me about a site that she was doing editorials for called kokugamer.net that gave her the chance to scratch that itch that she has to talk about retro games. After I had mentioned in the conversation that I had been interested in writing about games, she recommended that I get in touch with the head of the site, Admir. Now, after a bit of chatting, Admir got me to work pretty quickly. Early work that I did mostly centered on the discussion of video games as art. Now, keep in mind that this was before Brown versus the EMA had hit the Supreme Court, so there was still a major debate going on in regards to the subject. There were other things that I did as well. I did top 5s, top 10s that Admir wanted me to do, mostly because they brought in a lot of traffic. Full disclosure, I actually had several of my top 10s referenced on Kotaku of all places, as articles to read that they would do every week. To my recollection, Admir actually was an acquaintance of Brian Casente, who at the time was the head of Kotaku. On top of that, my editorial topics also centered around ethics in game journalism, and the necessity of freedom of speech to the arts. Sound familiar? Now, Admir was pretty enamored with my writing style, and wanted to get me into video game criticism as well. So, because I needed something to do, and wasn't going to turn down free video games no matter how bad they were, I went with it. I even remember the very first game I reviewed, Transformers War for Cybertron. If I remember correctly, I gave it an 8 out of 10. I seem to recall reviewing the rather mediocre Singularity as well, which oddly enough was one of Manveer Hare's games that he worked on with Raven Software. Funny how things go. Anyway, Admir was pretty enamored with my work. To the man's credit, he was one of the very first people to really give me a ton of encouragement about my writing and how good it was. The second was another gentleman who worked on that website with me, who also was part of That Guy with the Glasses and became a good friend of mine. His name was Justin Carmichael, also known as Juwario. He was super encouraging when it came to this sort of thing, and he said that if I kept at it, sky's the limit. And every time we ever talked, he always kept my spirits high. You can kind of understand why I miss him so much. Now, during the process of working for Admir, I was introduced to one Jose Vargas, who most of you know online as Angry Joe. Now, after our first meeting, Joe and I got to talking about Blistered Thumbs, considering Joe wanted to basically poach Kokugamer's talent. Blistered Thumbs had been a source of discussion for a while because it was the That Guy with the Glasses subset of video creators that were focused on video games. But they wanted to have an actual gaming site with journalism and the whole 9 yards. And I was part of the conversation to actually make it a reality at that point. Now, he came to me specifically because he enjoyed, and these are his words, my no-nonsense style of writing, and that I wasn't scared to back up my arguments to anyone, even him. In fact, I remember I had done a review of Kane and Lynch 2 that was a little bit more positive than his. I thought it was just kind of a run-of-the-mill average game. He thought it was considerably worse, and I debated the point with him on Lord Cat's stream. We disagreed on things, but he and I had a very good working relationship. It was around this point that the final planning stages for the site started to come into full effect, and I'd gotten to work with Joe on the written aspect from around August up until the launch in the late fall. We would have several conversations about the ethics policy and just talking shop about games and such, and we got to really gain some common ground. We were both college dropouts that were just trying to follow our dreams. Now, at that time, we worked together on the ethics policy, the review system, and all the little details of the written part. Now, sadly, around this time, I also lost a bit of favor with Joe. You see, one of my cohorts at Koku was named Eli. Eli was somebody who shared my passion for ethical game journalism. He also is the one who introduced me to Ben Padden, who ran the Tumblr blog Game Journalists Are Incompetent Fuckwits, which I've referenced in my work in the past. And he seemed like a fairly bright kid, too. Thing is, Eli hated Admir, because Admir was not above clickbait. And he tried to get me to join him in deposing Admir, going into Blistered Thumbs, so that he and I could basically be running the written element of the site. And we could avoid Eli's fear that BT would become a clickbait-written hellhole. This, of course, backfired on both of us. And the plan of me possibly being editor-in-chief for the website on its launch fell through, ending with me being just the United States editor of both the PlayStation and Xbox categories. Not really a huge downgrade, but it set the stage for what would happen between Joe and I at the end of 2011 and the beginning of 2012. When Blistered Thumbs launched, it was a bit of a clusterfuck. There wasn't much direction for comment moderation in articles. It took us a while to get the official board up, among other issues. On top of that, we never even let the audience know what the rules were in the comment sections of the website. The thing is, when we talk about this sort of thing, I have to admit something right out of the gate. The Micah Curtis that you're probably familiar with these days might as well have been a completely different person than in 2010. I was a miserable bastard. And I couldn't let go of my divorce. I couldn't get past my flaws. I couldn't get past anything. I was a prick. I mean, I'm kind of a jerk now, but I'm less of a jerk. I was about 3 times the jerk back these days. But I'd go out of my way to shut down people that would get aggressive towards me in the comments section. But they weren't using, what we defined as hate speech, which was a catch-all. Basically, if you got a comment deleted on Blistered Thumbs legitimately, it was because you were either blatantly racist, blatantly sexist, blatantly homophobic, as in there's no question that you're actively hating on somebody based on their identity. And then, of course, threats of violence were not tolerated whatsoever. Quite frankly, though, I hated the audience. I fucking hated the Blistered Thumbs audience at the start. But the thing is that I hated the audience and I hated gamers because I hated myself. And as I often say, the most pious individuals are often the biggest sinners, and I fell into that category. There's a couple people that I banned from that website that I do not regret banning whatsoever. But most of them I regret. On top of my personal issues, we also had to get rid of some of the writers from Koku Gamer because they just weren't fitting what we were looking for, the higher standards and whatnot. We also had to get rid of that guy with the glasses writing staple, Cold Guy, for the exact same reason. Now there was some controversy about that one, so let me expand. I was part of the editorial decision to let Cold Guy go. Joe and I had a conversation about it early one morning because neither of us had slept the prior evening. The fact of the matter was that his writing was atrocious on the website, and whenever someone came in and did the heavy editing needed to fix all of his grammar mistakes and terrible cadence, he would get angry about it. So Joe and I talked it over, and Joe talked to Cold Guy and just let him go. So, of all the controversy around Blistered Thumbs, I can at least explain that one completely, because to my knowledge, that has never been talked about. After we had made all the cuts, the only Koku Gamer staff left from that site was myself, Eli, Admir, Dan, and Yusuf. And even then, Eli didn't write anything for almost 10 months, and Dant was sort of a half-in, half-out kind of guy. He and Eli were really close, and Dant went with Eli to actually write for a different site simultaneously. But keep that little fact in mind, because it's going to come into play later. Now, at one point in time, I had to go on hiatus. In my personal life, I had finally hit rock bottom. And I moved to the city that I've now lived in since 2011 for work. There was no work in the town that my family lived in, so I had to leave. Now, it was here in this city that I got myself back in order, both mentally and spiritually. Because of prior infractions on my part, though, on top of my criticism of our site's E3 coverage driving a wedge between myself and Eli, keep in mind that this was the same year as Spoonie's betrayal nonsense and Joe's really bad interview with Jeff Keighley. The fact of the matter is that Blistered Thumbs was not batting very well, and we needed to improve our standards even more. That was my criticism. Thing is, I didn't feel like Blistered Thumbs had done as good as it could have done. So when I came back, I decided to come back big. I decided to try to set an example. I increased my output, despite being quietly bumped to a contributor position from my role as an editor. Now, this was done quietly. It was not done publicly because people were worried behind the scenes that it was going to send a bad message. So on the website, it was still seen that I was an editor. But what Joe told me, though, was that I could earn my way back into Channel Awesome's good graces with hard work. I also spent more time among the community, co-hosting the community podcasts on occasion, which highlighted posts and creative stuff from the community. In fact, one of the writers that ended up becoming a staple of Blistered Thumbs later on and is now a staple of Tech Raptor, I'm proud to say, is Robert Grosso, who, quite frankly, has earned all the success that he has gotten with both websites. I don't know if you can really find them anywhere, but if you can ever find his Characters with Character series, it's an incredibly well-written editorial series that talks about the ins and outs of a lot of great characters in video games. Totally recommend it. He's a very talented guy. Anyway, after a short time, I was given back my editor's position, with Joe showing a bit of shock. What he revealed to me was apparently Holly, Mike Michaud, and the Walker brothers did not expect me to put in the work to get back my position on the website. Well, I'll say this right now to Holly, to the Walkers, and to Michaud. Sorry to disappoint you. Things went pretty well up until the end of the year. We had great articles, we had reviews of all the biggest games, some of which we even were able to get out before release because we got lucky with certain media contacts. But we were having a dynamite year. And we were having a dynamite year in 2011, a dynamite year for video games. It was a perfect storm, and Blistered Thumbs was the place to be when it came to quality game writing at that time. And anybody else who says otherwise, let them be damned for lying. It wasn't perfect, but it was damn good. There was a problem, though. That problem's name was Eli. Now, it was around this time that Eli went and earned himself a brainwashing from a film school, and was 100% in when it came to social justice. He and I clashed many times in editorial chat rooms and such on Skype, with him coming after my political leanings, my demands for ethics in game journalism, which, may I remind you, 6 months prior he agreed with me on. And he did this because he was trying to suck enough dick to get in at some place like Destructoid or something like that, the exact same websites that I was going after for their lack of ethics. But on top of that, he also went after my belief in Christ as well. He also tried to get Joe to fire me more than once, and when it didn't work, he decided to get in good with the management above Joe's head. Now, this all came to a head in January of 2012. People probably remember pretty well when Joe was ousted at Blistered Thumbs. Here's the thing. He and I were both fired nearly simultaneously. Around this time, I had managed to anger the woman he called his girlfriend, but I prefer these days to call her his former pet horse, Amanda. You look at her face, you'll see why I say that. She threw a shit fit over something that she thought I had directed at her on Twitter, when really I was complaining about something that Yahtzee Croshaw had said on Zero Punctuation. So, sorry Amanda, you were never that special. From there, though, she then vocally quit the site over it. Her little tantrum was noticed by Holly, who, at the behest of Eli, used this as leverage with the Walkers and Mashad to try to show that Joe and I could not do our jobs properly, and that Blistered Thumbs was one giant mess. The last two conversations I had with Joe were about what we could tell our inevitable fate was at that point. Now, Eli had painted a picture of Joe as this inept dipshit who couldn't run a website, and me as this terrible conservative monster who hated the readership. Truth is that, yeah, I'm a conservative monster, but I don't hate the readership. Not at all. And Joe, quite frankly, should have appointed an editor-in-chief on the website to handle the written end of things, but he didn't, and thus he spread himself way too thin. But at this point, it didn't matter. Eli had gotten to the people in charge, and they will lie about that to this very day. Because of course they do. They have to give the impression that they're actually capable people. Well, they're not. The Walker brothers are complete and total jokes. You look at videos about the downfall of that guy with the glasses and how it's a shell of what it used to be, and you look at their attempt at a game show, and you can see that they can't manage for shit. And all Mike Mashad does is exactly what Lord Cat says he does. Sit around and play Xbox all day. And Holly had her head so far up her ass that she was able to tongue her heart valves. But the writing was on the wall. We sort of got our revenge, though, before we got ousted. So right before Joe lost all of his authority, he fired Eli and IP banned him from Blistered Thumbs. We got a good chuckle out of that one. Because, well, fuck Eli, and fuck his social justice nonsense. As it stands, though, that was the end of my tenure there. I was fired that same day. Joe was let go the next day. The next year, the site closed because Channel Awesome refused to give it the backing that, quite frankly, it deserved. And thus came the end of a website that I poured my heart and soul into. You see, what got the fire back in me during that hiatus was a speech I got about business from a boss that I had in the hotel business. One thing he always said to me is that the best workers will take ownership of the business, even if they're just grunts. If everyone takes ownership, takes pride in what they do, and gives 100%, they will succeed. He wasn't wrong with his hotels. And I noticed he had a point. So, when I came back from that hiatus, I took ownership of that site like I should have done so in the first place. And I realized that journalism is a service. You're there to serve your readers and give them information that they desire, or is relevant to their interests. You're not there to stand on a pulpit and preach to them. If you want to preach, be a preacher or a politician. If you want to give people information and your commentary if they ask for it, that's when journalism comes in. Service matters. Ethics matter. When you're short on both, over time, the audience will turn on you. The audience was not the same after I left Blistered Thumbs, because quite frankly, they were short on ethics and much larger on clickbait, and thus the site's traffic went down. The podcast that they established later on did help it, but it was too little too late. But here's the thing. I said this in 2012, in regards to journalistic ethics, and I said that the audience will turn on game journalism if it doesn't start to cherish ethics. Lo and behold, 2 years later, Gamergate happens. To close this out, I considered dedicating this episode to the memory of my friend Justin, to Juwario, but I decided against it. The reason being is that I want Justin's memory to be preserved as a positive, and this is largely a negative episode. He was a guy who just did good work, and always made everyone feel like they were the most important person in the world. And that's why I miss him so much. Rather, I think that what I'm going to do is continue to keep the faith that he had my work at the front of my mind and just keep going forward. I walked away from the relationships I had with people at Channel Awesome back in 2012, and what little ones I still had left in 2014 around the time Gamergate happened. I really just said, I'm done. And if anything, the whole situation has reminded me of why I do what I do. The fact is that social justice is a perversion of actual justice. A social justice warrior and other leftists infiltrated Blistered Thumbs, and they became a disease that ended up killing it. But that's the thing, though. The mindset of social justice cannot create. It only destroys. After I sat on the sidelines from 2012 to 2014, when I arrived at TechRaptor, I realized that there's a necessity for a man to stand up for what he believes in, and to always stand his ground. God doesn't make the world as screwed up as it is. We do. I feel responsible for the failure of Blistered Thumbs in a way. So, all I can do at this point is try to be the man that I'm supposed to be, and live in a way that keeps in mind all of the belief that people had in me while I was trying to make that website a success, and pour it into this channel, and make it a success. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is my story about Blistered Thumbs. My name is Micah Curtis. Thanks for watching.